When the Ministry of Defence required watches for the British military at the start of the Second World War, they turned to a number of names in the watchmaking industry. Since there was such a great demand, eventually 12 were contracted to make pieces. Some of the notable names chosen were Omega, Longines, Lemania, Jaeger-LeCoultre, IWC. Each watch looked very similar, following a set of specifications on how the dial was to be laid out, where the sub-seconds were placed and where the characteristic military broad arrow hallmark was set. On the caseback was engraved WWW, Watch, Wrist, Waterproof. Not only were they simple and legible, but they were luminous, chronometer accurate, hard-wearing and rugged instruments that accompanied these soldiers throughout the many campaigns across Europe. All of these pieces are now collectively known as the Dirty Dozen, and from this foundation we saw the development of the field watch, a genre of pieces that have since been standard issue for most militaries throughout the world for decades. Returning to the small manufacturer that borders Schaffhausen, a little unknown story about IWC is that they supplied both sides of the war. Not only did they create field watches for the British military, but they also created Flieger watches for Nazi pilots, a very profitable business model. Their positioning on the Swiss border allowed for them to be unaffected when the war ended and Germany was occupied. And this didn't bother them because they still had strong connections with the British military. In 1948, a request was made by the Ministry of Defence to create a Navigators wristwatch for the Royal Air Force. And using the design of the field watch as their foundation, the IWC Mark 11 came into being. This watch is considered one of the most iconic wristwatches in British military history. And what is fascinating about it is that it very much seems to be the amalgamation of a Flieger and a field watch. The intention was to make it as legible as possible, without being excessive in size. It uses all sorts of unexperimented technologies, like using an iron dial and cage around the movement to aid in anti-magnetism. They were also built to withstand the rapid temperature variations and general wear and tear of being used in military airplanes. In many ways we can see this watch as a prototype that propelled the concept of both the pilot's watch but also the field watch further. Now IWC has cemented itself in the genre of creating some of the most characteristic pilot watches of our time, and they are watches well worth revisiting in the future. Stay tuned. Just this year, to celebrate this history as well as a few milestones, they released a new series of watches, the Spitfire series. Without a doubt, this is an excellent move, and one that many of us can appreciate. Not only have they brought out a new series of commemorative pieces, but they have introduced new in-house calibers in the watches, and that is always a plus. But the inspiration behind this watch draws me to it more than anything else. It doesn't take an experienced eye to see the small cues taken from the original icons, as well as combining other aspects from their more modern line of Flieger pieces. And what they have created here is an excellent amalgamation of elements. I'll start by pointing out the reason why this watch caught my attention: the size and proportions. I know it is something I often criticize, but it truly is something that makes or breaks a watch. And this shows a clear understanding of what it means to balance both the watch's case size and dial architecture. At 39mm it falls into the contemporary size of modern pieces. Many with smaller wrists might be skeptical about the size, and as a recent comparison, I will look at the modern Rolex Explorer 214270 again. I will link the discussion about the watch in the corner of the screen now. This watch I criticized because the size and the spacing just doesn't feel 100% right. There are gaps and spaces that make the watch seem unoccupied, and this then makes the watch look all the more larger on the wrist. But returning to the Spitfire, the space on the dial has been intelligently allocated to the hands and the indices, as well as the defined minute track. It appears tight and focused, and thus it appears more impactful on the wrist as something more refined and integrated. The enlarged crown is also a nice callback to the older reference pieces, since they were sized at 33mm back in the day, and everything looked large in proportion back then. The case is slim in profile and adopts a typical IWC case styling. It is essentially a scaled-down Flieger. I appreciate the use of red accents on the text as well, and it makes me want to see red on the seconds hand, as you are seeing now in this mock-up. So considering all of the above, you might be able to see why this watch had a lot of buzz around it when it was released. It marks an occasion, and the Spitfire Automatic is the base model of the family. They released a whole range under the Spitfire name. I will link to an excellent video done by Hodinkee on the Spitfire chronograph in the corner. Now to the more debatable aspect of the watch. It is simple, yes, but its simplicity comes at a price. I'm not one to discuss the price of watches on this page, but let's just say that it is a lot. And for a piece that is essentially a field watch, it raises some eyebrows. Again, I have to emphasize that the movement is made entirely in-house, with attributes like extreme magnetic resistance and a 72-hour power reserve. But even still, aesthetically, it seems very plain for an expensive piece. The NATO strap. Of course it works extremely well with the aesthetic and fits the style of the watch. It comes with a leather lining underneath, but the configuration with an added leather strap with the watch, maybe with a deployant clasp, would have made it all the more versatile as a package. 2 straps for each piece would have allowed it to fit better in more situations. And now returning to the dial. I've praised the balance and the proportions of the piece, but not everything about it is perfect. The usual complaint I have about the date window. This one at least is scaled better to fit the face, and actually is in a practical position, but the symmetry may have been improved if the date was moved to the 6 o'clock position. Perhaps it would have looked even better without a date. But the one aspect of the watch that leaves me on the fence is the patina. The placement of the patina. I am of strong belief that if you opt to use faux patina on a watch, you either use it entirely or you don't use it at all. Again, in these mock-ups, I hope you see where I'm coming from. What might have worked better is if the outside plots on the minute track were evenly faded, but this configuration gives me the impression that the new watch has been fitted with vintage hands, and it just seems a bit conflicting. I will say that it does add visual interest and helps break up the dial, but it really isn't necessary. A watch like this looks the best with symmetry, and besides, it needs to appear like an instrument cluster. But the root of this piece, once again, it seems to be in its own genre. And that is one aspect that I think will catch many people's attention. It is part field watch, part pilot, and situates itself well in both camps. For those like me who appreciate its development, I think this approach of creating a modern homage to traditional navigator watches is inspired. It is under the radar cool. The kind of watch that you would expect someone like Steve McQueen to wear. The size of the watch needs to be praised, because there is an understanding here about what contemporary proportions means. This piece could fit a broad range of wrists and look fantastic, and it needs to be emphasized again and again. It is clear that the creative team behind these pieces had a blast during the creative process. As much as I would like to say that this watch is a near perfect recreation to the original pieces, I can't find everything about it to be great. But the foundation is here. Nothing can detract from this watch's history and what it is paying homage to, and the beauty about simplicity is that it not only leaves you wanting more, but it makes you appreciate what you have been given. And a watch design like this makes you consider a lot of things.